I joined Playworld in June last year to set up the development of a new funding support program. I now devote all my time to helping playground leaders like you find the money you need to fuel your playground dreams. Now, this includes the recent launch, by the way, of our customer coaching program, which Lauren and I want to talk a little bit more about at the end. This program was specifically designed to give Pelican and Ultiplay customers ongoing support with their fundraising campaign. So we've also developed a full package of web-based assets that will help you to better understand the donor market and launch and sustain a successful campaign. Maybe you've seen some of that material already. It's actually on the Playworld main site, and we can maybe find a way to get some of those resources to you at the end if you like. And again, I'd like to talk about the coaching program as well if we can. And I'd like to invite you as well to visit my website and hit me on Twitter or LinkedIn at the end of this, and we can be friends.
And for those of you that have questions, there is a Q&A area probably towards the left side of your screen. You can drop in questions there. We'll also likely have time at the end. If you want to stay on, we can allow you to talk, press the little button, and we can just answer questions at the end rather informally. This is a nice, intimate presentation. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Take it away.
I'll try to keep my presentation just a shade over 20 minutes today. And then again, if you have anything you want to talk about, put it in the window and we'll get that teed up for later as well. So as you'll see on the left there, I've divided my presentation into 4 unique sections. Together, these assets represent all the attributes of any successful fundraising campaign. Now, there's a truism in fundraising that you may have heard before that says people give to people. Now, I like to say that people give to people they know and people they like. And the first grant proposal I ever wrote picked up a check for $3.25 million from the investment arm of one of the largest banks in Canada. Now, the application itself was for a very well-established women's shelter in downtown Toronto. Now, guess who the chairperson was at the shelter's board? It just happened to be the president of the investment division at that very same bank. It's like I told my boss, I bet they didn't even read the proposal that I wrote before they signed the check. In short, the higher the level of a relationship with a major donor, the greater the chance that you'll get that donation. But of course, you should never underestimate the value of any relationship, whether it's with a senior executive, a branch manager, administrative assistant, teller, even the janitor. Over the years, I've noticed that successful donation partnerships typically boil down to 3 basic ingredients. Engagement with the right stakeholder. So typically what I do is I just ask some simple questions, who's the decision maker here? Who writes the checks? And, after that, I think about, how am I going to get engaged with that prospect? Ongoing cultivation and stewardship is key. I typically like to throw a bucket of cold water on my customers right at the start by telling them that, on average, it takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months to build a relationship with a donor and get a check in the door. And that means you'll typically need more than one touch of that donor to convince them to contribute as well. And you also need a well-timed ask. And we'll talk a little bit more about this subject in detail later, but I always try to get the ball rolling with a customer or prospective donor, as early in the year as possible. Now, remember, by late October or early November, most donors have already made their decisions for the year, and they're starting to look to next year as well. So I thought we'd sort of start out by ensuring that everyone has a basic understanding of the donor market. Now, to clarify, governments at the federal, state, and local levels account for the vast majority of donations to playgrounds and to charities in general. So you should always start there. But apart from government, however, it's individuals, not big corporations or family foundations, as most people believe, that give the largest amount of money to charity. Now, my rule, by the way, is to try to fish in all the donor pools that are available to you at the same time. Now, how do you do that? It's pretty simple. You just start out with the people you know, create a pipeline with their names and contacts and start reaching out to them one by one. Then I look for new donors within what I call my 50-mile rule. Now, most of the best aligned and best qualified donors for your playground will probably come from somewhere in your local community, in your county, or your basic region. Now, why is that? Because people typically like to give to causes that solve a problem or offer a solution or an improvement within their local community. And this is especially true of playground projects where the impact of that donation will be limited to a very definable geographical space. Now, let me take you through those local prospects that are best positioned for your campaign and talk a bit about what you'll need to do to get their attention. Now, wealthy individuals, it's a bit of a truism that everyone is only 6 degrees of separation away from the richest and most famous people in the world. So the first thing you want to do is to get at that person's money is to find someone with a pre-existing relationship to them or to their company or their business or their golf club or whatever it might be. You get that person to try to open the door for you. Now, if you don't have that relationship, you're going to want to try to build one from scratch with someone who's adjacent to that person or connected to them in some way. Now, private foundations, I start every campaign by identifying the local community foundation in my area and a handful of, 2 or 3 of the top family foundations. If they have a website and better yet, an online application, then you've got a direct line to them. Now, large corporations, they almost always invest in the communities where their employees live and work. No matter what else they do with their money, they're always looking to their plants and where their people live. They're also hungry for stories of their employees doing good in the community. So check their website, like the larger foundations, check their website to see if you qualify and whether they have an open application process. And then try finding someone who works there and to learn more about their giving program and see if you can open a door to some of those people before you apply. Local businesses are a huge backbone. You may be surprised how much money the local grocery store owner or a small manufacturing entity, lawyers or dentist's office generates every year. My daughter just went to the dentist today, and oh, geez, holy cow, they do pretty well. Now, if they like what you do, those local business owners can make decisions quickly, and they can stroke checks quickly as well. So if you already have a business or personal relationship with those folks, then you're already halfway home with them. So service clubs, it's true they often wear funny hats, but only a fool would underestimate the power of the local Elks or Rotary or any other dedicated kind of service club in your community. They're not just great potential donors either. They can connect you to volunteers, wealthy people, or other decision makers in your community. So we're on to the second section now, planning and organizing your campaign. Now, I usually start every campaign by asking myself one simple question. Is this a project that I would support with my own money? If the answer is yes, then I start building our plan from there. If the answer is no, then I go back to the customer and tell them that we still have some work to do. Now, I recommend that every campaign try to build a plan, even if it's just 2 or 3 pages in length. You don't need to get someone with an MBA or an advanced degree to conduct this exercise either. You just want to think about through an answer that all those questions that will impact your campaign, like you see here. One key element of this exercise is not to develop an elegant plan and then consign it to some dusty subfolder on your hard drive. You want to get back and revisit that plan regularly, review your objectives, and evolve and adapt your assumptions and your timelines especially, and as well the resources that you need to fit that task at hand. Now, if you want to see my campaign plan outline, it's in part of those downloadable web resources that I spoke about earlier. And you can get it from the Playworld website, or we can line that up for you later if you'd like to see a copy of that. I always say asking people for money is a lot like dating. There's that initial connection and the discovery of common interests. You get to know each other a bit better. You find some common ground, and you develop a deeper connection. And then after a suitable period of time, one of you pops the question. Now, you probably wouldn't ask someone to marry you on a first date, right? But you'd be surprised how often people ask for a donation as part of that first touch to a donor or prospect. My suggestion is to always start your conversation with a prospect by educating and informing them and building your personal and organizational credibility. Remember, once they've said no, you may not get a second chance to ask, so be patient. Another common mistake charities make is they fail to give themselves sufficient road to cultivate those relationships, as I said earlier, submit applications, and get those commitments in the door. A major charitable capital campaign, for example, like in addition to a hospital or the construction of a new university building, for example, it might take anywhere from 2 years to 5 years, maybe even 10 years. It's big enough. As you can see very clearly in the table on the right, the larger the campaign, the more time it'll take to build those relationships, exchange that information, and make the ask.
And I think if I can just interrupt you really quickly, back to those numbers that you had on the screen. So, what we're seeing as far as playgrounds go, you can put together like a nice playground for a school or a neighborhood. In our area in Louisiana, Mississippi, $50,000 is a reasonable and good budget. You're not going to usually be able to get the necessarily a shade structure in there. You may not be able to get both the shade structure and the nice like turf or unitary surfacing. Once you start adding those things, the budget tends to go up a bit. So these numbers and these timelines are good to know. And I find that often schools or neighborhoods reach out to us once their playground has gotten to the point where they're like, this seems unsafe, this is broken, that is broken. You know, try to keep touch points on that earlier on, so you know, like, okay, if we really want to replace this with a nice new playground with, you know, surfacing that's going to last longer and a shade structure, you want to start thinking about that before your current playground has hit the 10-year-old mark. Just because if you're going to be looking for grants or funds from individuals or businesses, you really are going to need a bit more of a runway.
And you know, one customer I spoke to recently, they're doing theirs in a phased fashion. They've raised some money over the last couple of years, and they want to put that in the ground now so they can show the community what they've done and then tee up that next phase after. So that's even a possibility if you could do that. Remember, these are advisable timelines only. You just never know what can happen when you start talking to people. But you know, my job when I'm working with a charity is to make sure that I'm not overselling what I'm doing and make sure that, you know, always give yourself enough road. So does that close off all your conversation on that subject, Laura? It's good. Good to go.
Yes,
Okay.
thanks.
I'll keep talking. So anybody ever heard of Simon Sinek before? Let me know in the box there. He's a market researcher who became very famous on the interweb with a series of discussions on human behavior, particularly when it came to purchasing decisions. He's also got a very popular TED Talk. If you just type his name into the Google machine, you'll see his name. Now, Simon Sinek's research proved that no matter how much we think we're rational beings, who are guided, especially in our purchasing decisions, by logic and reason, this is totally 100% untrue. Rather, and just as advertisers have been saying for generations, we make all of our buying decisions and our donation decisions based on emotion. So let me illustrate. You know, these are the three campaign messages that I think resonate best with prospective donors on both on primarily on an emotional level. Now, the most important one I think is inclusion and inclusiveness today. Now, you don't have to look too far to see the issue of fairness for each person in today's social discourse. And I think, you know, anytime you can tap into those kind of movements, you're on really firm ground. So projects that are purpose built to include children with physical or mental disabilities will attract the broadest and most enthusiastic cross-section of potential donors. Now, active living and healthy kids, you know, playgrounds aren't just about fun and recreation anymore. They're about getting kids some physical activity and positive mental stimulation, as well as some distance from their phones. And people value those things right now in ways that they didn't in previous generations. Community development is also a big factor. At its core, a new playground adds to the overall quality of life in a community. The messages like catnip to organizations that are looking to accomplish the same thing. Now, with many traditional avenues of entertainment now closed off due to COVID, playgrounds and parks are increasingly being viewed as significant and important community spaces. Now, to close off this slide real quick, the more you can tailor the message in the direction of any or all of these three messages, the higher the likelihood that your story will make that all important emotional connection in the donor's mind. And again, it'll also open up a much broader pool of donors to your prospect or your campaign. And you know what I often say at the end of this is, you know, wouldn't you sponsor a child for $1 a day? You know, so you know that's the essence of an emotional connection. Now, what are
So
the
true.
qualities? Pardon me.
Oh, I said so true. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? That's the best. I think the person who invented that campaign or the people who invented that were geniuses. They understood human behavior, and that's why that model will always work. So if you say, "Hey, we're going to help this one kid," you know, we're doing an inclusive playground. We want to focus on this one kid's story. Then that's how you'll make that engagement. You won't make that engagement by focusing on all the kids in your community. You have to bring it down to one kid and one family. I don't want to get too far into the messaging today, but thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. Now, how do you know when a prospect is a good prospect? By learning how to quickly and effectively determine the alignment of a prospect, you save yourself a ton of time and headspace. But more importantly, you'll generate a higher rate of positive responses and return phone calls when it comes time to start connecting with those potential donors. first thing you can understand is that there's no one size fits all donor. Every funding market is unique in its own way. So typically, I like to say that donors in New York City, for example, don't tend to have a lot in common with donors in Albany. Or by that same token, money made in Texas tends to stay in Texas. So you want to find out what's characteristic about your community, both from a geographic and industrial fashion. Do we have a couple of good family foundations there? Is there some large manufacturing entities, a couple of big companies? Um, Most of all, you want to focus on their expressed giving interests. Do they like community development, youth, healthy living, active lifestyles, supporting people with disabilities? Now, once I feel I've got that alignment, I want to explore, what their capacity to give is. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, that refers to the amount of money that a foundation, corporation, or individual has to give away every year. For a foundation, you can find this expressed in the size of their assets and their annual income. With corporations, it comes from their revenue, profits, and employee numbers. Now, for individuals, I always want to know right off, is that person retired and on a fixed income, or are they still working and making lots of cash? Um, so while I'm examining a donor prospect's geography, giving interest, and capacity to give, and I see something that matches, I make a simple check mark in my head. The more check marks I make, the closer the match to my project. So when I take that prospect, and I dump them in a hopper or a pipeline, donor pipeline as I call it, then I go back and I review that donor 2 or 3 or 4 times before I decide whether or not I'm going to make that application. The process is a little, to get metaphoric about it, it's a little bit like carving. Shave a little bit off each time until that finished shape kind of comes into focus. And what are the methods you can use to identify these donors? And these are some of the techniques and resources that I've acquired and utilized over the years. The best one that I use all the time is one of my favorites is competitor searches. So one time I was working for a big museum organization in Vancouver. And so when I'd exhausted all the prospects that I could get my hands on, I drove to all the major arts, culture, and recreational institutions in town and took a picture of their donor wall. Then I went home and skimmed the best ones off and dumped them into my pipeline, shook them around a little bit, and decided which ones I could use. Um, for your project list, you want to look at the donor list of other playgrounds, recreation projects, organizations devoted to community development, youth, inclusiveness, etc. Boys and girls clubs are fantastic groups. If you have a group that deals with disabled children, you might want to look at that. You don't necessarily need to go to the local pool and take a photo of their donor wall to get that info. You could probably find it online or in their annual report. Oftentimes people do social media posts on their big donations, that kind of thing. So dial into some of that. It's all free and easy to get at. Sort of like top 10 lists. The internet is full of lists about companies and business leaders, top 10 in your region, top 25 entrepreneurs, top 40 under 40, top 30 under 30. I always hated those folks myself, but no one ever says the top 60 over 60 kind of thing. But generally speaking, you can hoover that stuff up all day long. Now, private databases, there are many fee-based donor prospect research databases on the market. You may be hearing from some of them soon or may have heard from them in the past. They're primarily geared towards foundation and corporate donors. I use one almost every day. It can cost a lot of money. The one I use is about 140 bucks US a month. Try checking out your local library or asking a charity partner to see if they have a database that you could tap into. Now, government agencies, many municipalities and counties support funds specifically devoted to parks and recreation development. Start by visiting your city hall or county parks and rec department website. Many states also have outdoor recreation and active living program grants, or even one-time bond offers that you can tap into. We tapped into a massive bond offer just last month from California. Your state is also responsible for managing the federal government's Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. This is the single largest source of donations to playgrounds in the US every year. So again, you want to check out those government sources as well before you do anything else. Now, I don't want to restate the obvious or belabor the point too much, but your efforts to engage a prospect and build a relationship with them will be remembered when it comes time to making a decision about your request. Now, what are some of the ways you can generate that first touch, that all-important first touch, and start building a relationship with a donor that's going to last? Telephone, you can't go wrong, right? I found this smallish family foundation in Ohio for my customer a few years back. They had no website, just a telephone number and a mailing address on my private database. And so they were a really, really good match. So I asked the customer, I said, listen, why don't you call them as part of our overall outreach, see where it takes you. I think I gave him 10 names or something and said, go out and get him, Charlie. He called them and this little old lady answered the phone and he said, hey, can I please speak to XYZ Foundation? And she took a deep breath and paused. And then she said, congratulations, you found us. And after that, their conversation warmed up, quite considerably. And as she was emailing him the application, he asked her, what are your general sort of guidelines for request? And she said, well, it's really simple. Everyone who calls us gets the application and is invited to apply, and all other correspondence is thrown in the garbage can. So they gave us 20,000 one year, by the way, and 20,000 the next year as well. So I've got stories like that again and again and again. So email, statistics say that only 5 to 10% of voicemails and emails are ever returned. With voicemails, I think it's probably like 0% or 1%. My personal experience tells me that if a person has their email published on their website, chances are there's a pretty good chance that they're going to return your call. But remember, with phone calls and emails, the more senior the individual who's making that inquiry, the higher the likelihood that inquiry will be returned. Now, by the way, here's a good one for you old people like me. Hear this, okay? The new ways often work better than the old ways. Now, I've been doing direct messaging to people very successfully, particularly on LinkedIn, for the last year or two now. Last month, I found this great little family foundation for my customer. Again, no telephone number, no contact info of any kind. They'd scrubbed it from their profile. So what I did is I found all they had was the list of the board of directors. So I took the president's name and I looked them up on LinkedIn, and then I sent him a request to be to be connected to my network and a little note telling him who I was and what I wanted. And I don't think it was less than 3 hours later I got an email from the guy with their guidelines and their application. That's pretty slick stuff. But remember, if you want to leverage your social media, you need to make sure your profile is pretty well dialed in. And I've been working on my LinkedIn for a lot of years now. Now, a letter of request is also known in the business as a letter of inquiry. Back in the pre-internet Pony Express days, the letter of inquiry was the primary vehicle for communicating with donors, particularly foundation donors. That's diminished a lot in the electronic world, but I still use it as my go-to direct mail style vehicle. I usually send out a letter of inquiry, and then I have a plan to follow it up in a couple of weeks by phone or email. Now, if you get a contact on the phone, for example, they'll often say, well, I don't recall seeing that. And then they'll ask you to resend it to them via email. So now I have that contact's name, and I also have their email as well. So it's not a glamorous undertaking, trust me. Most of the time when you telephone people, you'll hit a polite assistant at some lawyer or bean counter's office. But when all other avenues have failed, what do you have left? Well, you have event invitations. Events really remain one of the best ways to build an authentic relationship with a donor. Prior to COVID, I was increasingly seeing online and offline segments blending together. Now, suffice it to say that as the in-person event model is closed up over the last 12 months, opportunities with online fundraising have opened up even further. Think about it this way. All that money that was donated to last year's gala fundraising dinner or golf tournament still needs a place to go this year, and probably next year as well, too. Chances are someone who doesn't have a clue who you are will come to your event, but the chances are also fairly good that they'll read the invitation, especially if it's got some style and some substance to it. If you follow that communication up with a phone call, email, or direct message, who knows? They might just remember your name. Now, the key with these methods is to mix it up and try them in combination. I also have, but I'm going to put this in my presentation next time, what I call a 3 strikes rule. So if I've tried that person 3 strikes, really sincerely, I've tried them 3 times, 3 different ways, I still haven't received a response, then I figure it's time to move on to the next prospect. One more slide and then we'll wrap it up, okay, and get to some questions. To engage with people, you'll need to prepare a campaign package with several short read documents that can be sent via email or printed out and mixed and matched and distributed by hand to the right donor. Now, I usually start by building that 2 to 3 page project overview. Then I use that primary information to construct any applications or associated marketing collateral. And by the way, the name of my fundraising consultancy is 5W Fundraising. And I use that because I actually started out in journalism. I started my career in journalism, and with journalism, the first thing you learn is who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I just found that those are the most simple things to ask when you're building a project overview. Now, when you're building that overview, save one page for your renderings or a mock-up of your playground. That's really, really critical with any project, but particularly with playground projects. It makes it real for the customer, and it gives them something that they can make that emotional attachment, anchor that emotional attachment to, okay? And as far as the other items that you'll need on here, recognition is probably the most important resource that you can develop as part of your campaign. And what comes when leveraging major gifts, for example, the offering of naming rights or other public recognition will go a really long way, especially when trying to attract that local grocery store baron or the dentist or the corporate donor. Those people really care about public recognition. So you can update your package and add new things to it as you go, newspaper articles, media posts, big check presentations, that kind of thing. Now, on the right, in addition to a campaign package, you'll need a few additional documents when filing any online applications or web-based applications. These are the things that I get asked for time and time and time again. You'll always be asked for your proof of charitable status, your budget for this year, and your financial results for last year, or your Form 990. If you have audited stuff as well too, that'll be great. But typically those are the things you're always asked for from donors. This is part of their due diligence process. Yeah, try to put them into one folder on your hard drive and keep them organized there, and it'll help you out a lot, save you a lot of time and grief. So let's wrap it up now. Last section. Succeeding over the long haul. The biggest challenge with the campaign, as far as I'm concerned, is sustaining it over time. One important message I want to leave with you today is this: no campaign can succeed in a vacuum. As a campaign leader, you've got to spread that responsibility around as widely as possible. One of the first things you can do to advance your campaign in the short term is to set up a campaign committee made up of your directors, partners, or volunteers, people who are really committed to your mission and to this project. Now make sure you set up a regular meeting and create an agenda so you can focus all your progress and complete designated tasks as a team on time and in a structured fashion. One of the next most important things you can do is to set up a donor pipeline, as I mentioned earlier. That holds all your prospects, all their contact information, last touches, and it informs you of where that prospect is in the engagement process. I like to segment my donors into 3 different tiers of alignment and focus my efforts on getting at those folks in the higher tier first. Now, you want to review that pipeline regularly with your team. Make sure you're moving people up and down that ladder from a prospect to a friend to a supporter to a donor. Now, in the fundraising and sales business, we call this moves management. The objective of moves management is to continue to touch that donor until they're in a position to say yes to a strategically focused and well-timed request. On this last point, let me just say that as you start to shake the tree and engage with stakeholders and the wider donor community, new prospects and prospect pools will start to reveal themselves. You want to ensure that you're always turning over new rocks and looking for new ways to engage those prospects anywhere or any way you can. Maybe you want to hold a community groundbreaking event and invite the mayor and local media and your closest prospects. Maybe you want to get one of your donors who owns a business in town to challenge other businesses to match his family or her family's contribution. Maybe you want to have an online auction or even a crowdfunding campaign. Maybe there's a great grant program coming up from the state government that you're thinking about submitting an application to. The possibilities are limited only by your imagination. In the end, and to sum up my presentation today, the more you work together as a team to engage with donors and brainstorm new ways of engaging those prospects and building awareness in your target community, the more you'll start to feel that momentum grow and build in your campaign. If you can move your campaign a little bit forward towards the goal line each week, I guarantee you will start to see the fruits of your labors fairly quickly. And that's wraps up the formal component of my presentation. Hope I kept you all engaged there.
Thank you, Jason. This was really informative. Some things in particular that I know that we've helped our, playground partners do is, start the beginnings of a campaign package. We help them kind of give a narrative about the playgrounds that we're designing with some really nice, pretty 3D renderings, and even try to drop it into something that looks like their, looks like their location. So, this is really helpful. And I'm going to just go to our attendees and press the button to allow y'all to talk. So Meredith, you have your hand up first. So go ahead and ask your question. Meredith, can you, I unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. How are you?
I'm on my cell phone, and so it has put you onto the speaker now. Can you not see me?
We cannot see you.
Okay, all right. So I'll just lift up my phone. Hi. I loved the presentation. A question I had is, we're in Maine, and I did a fundraiser a couple of years ago, right before COVID, for 2 little girls that were battling cancer, and it was very successful. But that was before COVID. And so now I feel like with COVID approaching these businesses that have suffered during the pandemic financially, how do you feel, like, how do you go in approaching asking for donations or, with everything that we've been through?
That's just such a great, timely question. I think the simple answer is a couple of answers here first. I want to look to the companies that have done well out of the pandemic first. So,
Okay.
Like box stores have done very well. Again, so I'm not I'm not going to restaurants these days.
Yes.
I'm staying out of the retail stuff. Let's put it this way: the stock market's taken off, so your foundations are much more wealthy than they were. Large corporations have generally tended to do quite well out of this. I think retailers, door-to-door retailers have suffered. Online businesses have done well. So I think what you want to do is mix and move and match and bob and weave like a boxer might do. And I do have some good news that's a little off that question is, so for the last year, everybody's been in emergency mode. So if you go to the local community foundation, they're in emergency. They've got a COVID emergency thing going. The biggest foundations have COVID emergency plans. That is starting to loosen up now. That money's been played. We just had the federal government now has come in with that massive relief plan. You got the big, huge, there's going to be an infrastructure plan coming in as well. I think foundations and corporations, people who do have money right now, and there's still lots of them out there, they're no longer in emergency mode. They've moved back to their main funding stream. So I think that's very encouraging as well. And again, the great thing about fundraising is, I always say, you got to go with the hand you're dealt, right? You can't sort of change reality. You just have to kind of put your head down and just put one foot in front of each other. And hey, by the way, I have a joke that I took out of the presentation because it was getting a little long, but what's the number one reason that someone didn't donate to your playground? Nobody asked them.
No, that's true. That's good.
Simple but true, right? So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Anyone else that I can help come off mute?
Do you want to talk about the coaching program if there isn't anybody else?
Yeah, so while we're still here, so this is just a general informational session, whether you're brand new at fundraising or you've done this before. But one of the reasons why, one of the great things about Jason is that he's kind of at our disposal, and we're allowed to, Playworld has kindly allowed us to match him with our playground customers. If you have a project that you're ready to get off the ground and just haven't started a true, vigorous fundraising campaign before, Jason can kind of speak about the program that we have available.
Yeah, so we called it the coaching program for a reason, right? We want to come in and we want to help people get to where they want to go. A coach is going to train up the team and make sure they're ready for the big game, and then make sure they win. And so what I did is, coming from a consulting background, is I realized that writing really great web downloadable material, giving presentations like this, they're really useful, but they're not going to get customers to where they want to go. And I've worked with over 150 customers in my 20 years in this game, and one thing I've realized is that people need to be led along the continuum. They don't necessarily need people to take over their campaign or to own it, but everybody needs someone who can come in and give them a little bit of support and ongoing advice. Hey, maybe we need to write a 2-page project overview. We need to identify some prospects out the door. So I came in and we developed this coaching program. It's designed to give hands-on support to well-positioned customers who are serious about bringing their campaign to fruition. So the first thing we do is we'll have a consultation with you. We'll sit down, we'll talk about your campaign. After that, I'll go out and I'll look at some people in the marketplace who might be able to give you some money. We'll wrap that up into some recommendations. I'll give you some recommendations where I think you want to go. Wrap that up into a nice bow, and we'll give that to you. And you can take that along with you. And then, as you sort of partner with Pelican, as you get closer to Pelican as your preferred playground provider, then we can come in and maybe give you some, some more hands-on support throughout the continuum of your campaign. Does that help explain it? Questions?
I think so. So I think, if it were me and I was listening in on this and I wanted to know about this coaching program, whether I was in New England and working with Altiplay or in the Southeast working with Pelican, does it cost me anything? What does it cost me? How does that setup work?
Thanks. Thanks for reminding me. It's a free service. My time is always free to customers. So it's always free to the customer. And no, not always free. It's always free, period. So my time is always paid for, and it's paid for by Playworld. So I'm here at our customers' disposal. And my job is to try to partner up with the customers who are best positioned for success and to help pull them across the goal line. That's really my only mandate right now. So if you want to get started on that program, if you're interested and you're serious about fundraising and you're serious about a partnership with Altiplay and Pelican, talk to your sales representative. They'll enter you into the project, into the coaching program, and we can go from there and have a conversation on how we might be able to support you across that length of your campaign.
Yeah, and I can speak from experience. I sit in all of my free time. I sit on a board of a school here in New Orleans, and we, whenever possible, use people like Jason or other consultants to just help us. Like if they are offering services to hold our hands through something, like we're currently working with someone that's helping us with a 5-year strategic plan, and all of the board members are really excited about it and we're ready to go, but we just need that professional, that person who does this over and over and over again and knows how to get a successful outcome to just hold our hand through it. So that's why we wanted to do this presentation today, show you all that this is available to you at no cost to you, and just say, like, reach out to us, and we'd love to get Jason on the phone with you and with us, and we can kick this off together.
Yeah, I could have said it better myself.
Great. Any other questions? If not, feel free to sign off. We will email out the recording later. But if you do have more questions, either drop them in the Q&A or raise your hand, or I can take you off of mute while we're all together. Otherwise, go ahead and feel free to log off.
Have a super day, folks. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.